In John F. Kennedy's address, he starts out by saying hello to the population, saying good evening, my fellow citizens, suggesting that this is a speech that is maybe TV transmitted from the Oval Office in the White House. He starts his speech off by introducing the topic of these two African Americans or Negroes. They've been accepted to the University of Alabama, but they can't go there without there also being national troops at the scene. And then John F. Kennedy, he says who he's talking to. He says, I hope that every American, regardless of where he lives, will stop and examine his conscience about this and other related incidents. And then he moves over to some history where he says that the country was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. And he also mentions the principles on which the country was founded, to which he will return later. He then compares the soldiers going to war with the everyday and the Negroes in the public, because the military doesn't discriminate by color, and then the public does. And then he returns to the main topic of speech again, the two young people. And then in the next part, he uses a rhetorical device. He repeats a lot. He keeps saying it ought to be possible, almost as if he's challenging the listeners, because he addresses the population after every it ought to be possible. So he'd say it ought to be possible for American consumers or American citizens, or in short, for every American. And then afterwards, he uses statistics to strengthen his ethos. He uses statistics about how the general black person would have a worse quality of life than a white person, and how the Negroes will or won't live as long as the white Americans. And then he addresses again who he's talking to so that no one can excuse themselves for not caring about what he's saying. And then afterwards, he says that it's better to settle these matters in the courts than on the streets. And new laws are needed at every level, but law alone cannot make men see right. And in this very powerful sentence, he both says that there's a need for new legislation, but also a need for the Americans to change their mindset, because just because there are new laws doesn't mean that the Americans will follow new rules or whatever. So yeah, it's not just necessary that they make new laws, but people has to um, like accept and adapt them into their culture. And then he mentions Lincoln, and he says that the slaves aren't free yet, even though the Constitution was made over 100 years ago. And it clearly reads from the Constitution that every man is equal. And then he asks the nation again, how can this not be already? And why isn't every man equal? So by him asking these questions, he engages them in what he's been talking about this whole time. And the question he asks is, well, he makes listeners put themselves in the Negro's place. This has a very powerful effect. So yeah, he's saying, like, for example, I can find it here. He says, that why, like, because they preach freedom around the world, um, how can it be the land of the free except for the Negroes, and stuff like that, and how or who will participate to step in their place, because he knows that no one would. And then he finishes his speech with a really strong one-liner where he urges the nation to fulfill its promise by treating everyone equally as it was promised in the Constitution.